The man in this surveillance footage has just murdered 3 innocent people and dismembered their bodies in a bathtub. Even though it's only been hours since he committed one of the most heinous crimes on record, you're watching him stop at Walmart to buy a Halloween shirt and a turkey sandwich. To him, it's an ordinary day. To 13-year-old Sarah Maynard, who is tied up and trapped in his basement on a pile of leaves, it is the worst day of her entire life.
Later, I found out that he had laid me on their dead bodies in the car.
Knowing that you can never say mom again, like, it's the worst feeling in the world.
It's 4 days after her kidnapping before she is rescued, and the truth of her kidnapper's depravity is revealed.
I knew I must have done something wrong, and I found her in my house. She tied up. I think I'm crazy.
This is the view that 30-year-old Matthew Hoffman had of Tina Herman's home as he camped out overnight in the freezing cold, watching her family from the shadows. Born in Mount Vernon, Ohio in 1980, Matthew had always struck his community as odd, unusual, and perhaps a little dangerous. But no one foresaw him going to these lengths to do something so evil. In retrospect, however, there were glimpses of the evil within him. In his childhood, Matthew was known for being quiet but polite. He didn't show any of the typical warning signs that indicate a child could be developing into someone dangerous, like killing animals, threatening people, or setting fires. No, none of those things came until Matthew was in his late teens and early 20s. And when they did come, they came on with a fury. In 2000, 20-year-old Matthew found work as a plumber in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. His colleagues claimed to have liked him well enough, although they found him to be quiet and off-putting at times. However, their relationships with Matthew were severed abruptly in September of 2000. Because one night, for no reason in particular, Matthew stole several massive road signs from the town, including their "Welcome to Steamboat Springs" sign. He then left the signs that he stole in his hotel room and skipped town without saying a word to anyone. It should go without saying that if you want to get away with a crime and are skipping town to do so, leaving the evidence in a room you've paid for isn't exactly a great way to do that. It didn't take long for law enforcement to track him down, and it took even less time for Matthew to admit that he stole the signs. When they asked, he blatantly admitted to taking them, stating that he wanted them as a souvenir. Generally, I like to take my souvenirs home with me, not leave them in my hotel room, but as you'll see, Matthew is a very, very different type of individual. Matthew willingly traveled back to Steamboat Springs to participate in interrogations and potential sentencing for his theft of city property. When he arrived, however, law enforcement had something different in mind. While reviewing his file, an officer noted that Matthew's name was familiar. Weeks prior, a large condo complex had burnt to the ground, causing $2 million in damages and nearly costing 16 people their lives. The condos had been renovated just days before the fire by the plumbing company that Matthew had worked for, and Matthew had been assigned to the condo that analysts determined the fire had originated from. While questioning Matthew about the stolen signs, detectives sprung the surprise on him, asking him about the fire at the complex. Because not just had the condos been set on fire, but the condo owner's car had been stolen and abandoned on that same night. The inside of his car was dusted, and dozens of Matthew's fingerprints were discovered. Surprisingly, Matthew threw up his hands and said, "Fine, you got me." He told investigators that he had gone into the condo himself 5 times while he knew the owner was on vacation. He watched TV, cooked meals, and even used the jacuzzi. Then, to cover up his crime, he decided to light the building on fire to conceal his fingerprints. Clearly, he forgot his fingerprints were all over the car as well. Matthew was charged with arson, breaking and entering, and first-degree aggravated motor vehicle theft. After serving 6 years of an 8-year sentence, he was free once more. He moved back to Ohio and got a job at a local tree trimming company. Matthew had always harbored an obsession, and some would argue a fetish, with trees. He described to his family in detail that he felt a thrill whenever he climbed them, and he dedicated much of his time to scaling the trees around his home, even using specialized equipment to do so. In the beginning, however, he used his passion and skills for good. He settled down with a woman who had an 8-year-old son and spent a lot of his time teaching the neighborhood kids how to climb, feeding the squirrels with them, and educating them about nature. In 2010, that changed. Matthew went from being a friendly neighbor to a strange, off-putting, and downright dangerous person that everyone began to avoid. 2 of his dogs disappeared, and neighbors firmly believed that he killed them. His strange obsession with trees took a drastic turn, and he would spend hours on end perched up in them, watching the neighborhood. He started killing squirrels and roasting them over the barbecue. In fall of 2010, Matthew's girlfriend left him, taking her son with her. Things started to spiral. When she returned to the home on October 24th to get her things, Matthew displayed just how violent he could be. In the midst of an argument, he pinned his girlfriend against the wall by her neck. As she struggled to breathe, they fell to the ground, where he began to choke her yet again. His girlfriend managed to call the police, who arrived and forced Matthew to leave. However, out of fear and exhaustion, she never pressed charges against him. Just days later, Matthew discovered this spot. To this day, he claims that he only began watching the home to plan a non-violent robbery of it. However, as you'll soon see, that doesn't align with what he brought with him on November 10th, or what he did inside this home on King Beach Drive. For days, Matthew watched the home, learning the routines of the family who lived there. There was the mother, 32-year-old Tina Herman, whose greatest joy in life was raising her 2 kids. She worked at a local Dairy Queen, loved sunflowers and dolphins, and spent every second she could engaging with her kids and cheering them on in sports. Her 11-year-old son Cody was an avid football and baseball player, and known by everyone around him to be an incredibly kind and compassionate young man. Then there was 13-year-old Sarah, who loved softball and was best friends with her little brother. Tina had chosen the home on King Beach Drive because it was isolated, far from neighbors, giving the family privacy to grow, explore, and play outside. Unfortunately, that isolation is the same thing that drew Matthew to the home. He would later claim that he picked it at random after searching for an isolated house, and that the broken garage door made it an easy target. At 1 a.m. on November 10th, Matthew parked his vehicle about a mile away from the home on the other side of the dense woods across the street. He slept in the brush in a sleeping bag that night, waiting to strike. That morning, he watched as the kids went to school. He watched as Tina went to the store, picking up groceries for the family. With everyone gone, he slipped in through the garage and waited. If this was a robbery, he had over an hour to rob the house. Instead, he hid in a bedroom until he heard the door open. Based on the crime scene photos, Tina had enough time to come into the home and set down the groceries she had bought. She didn't have enough time to put them away. Matthew sprung out from his hiding place and struck her over the head with a blackjack. As she screamed, he dragged her to the bedroom. Then he hit her repeatedly, later telling police that he only wanted to knock her out so he could rob the home in peace. Yet what he did next shows how much of a lie that was. Because when he grew tired of hitting Tina over the head, he began to stab her repeatedly with a long hunting knife. It was determined that the fatal wound she received was a 13-inch vertical slash that stretched from her chest down to her abdomen, essentially disemboweling her. Then he got to work dismembering her in her own bathtub. He had carefully planned out every action of the day to get to that moment, but nothing could have prepared him for the door opening. 41-year-old Stephanie Sprang was Tina's best friend. Many described the two as inseparable. Because of a breakup that Tina was going through, she was actually planning on moving out of the home on King Beach Drive. That day, Stephanie arrived to go apartment hunting with Tina in preparation for a brand new lease on life. Instead, she opened the door to the bloody scene of her best friend's murder. Immediately, Matthew rushed Stephanie with the knife in hand. Panicked, Stephanie tried to flee to Sarah's bedroom to climb out the window, but Matthew caught up to her, stabbing her in the back twice before she bled out on the carpet. Then he continued to stab her dead body. It was complete overkill. He wasn't done yet. At some point during these 2 altercations, Matthew killed the small family dog because of its loud barking. He dragged all the bodies to the bathroom and continued to dismember them, placing each body part in trash bags he found in the home. To cover his tracks, he poured motor oil all over the bloody stains with the intention of setting the home on fire. By then, several hours had passed. Both Matthew and the home were coated in blood, and as Cody and Sarah arrived home from school, they walked into a horrifying scene. Upon seeing the blood in the hallway, the 2 called out to their mom. Instead, Matthew charged at them. He tackled Cody first as Sarah ran to her bedroom to call 911. Tragically, she never got the chance. As she tried to dial, Matthew grabbed her and tied her arms and legs together using a fan cord. When he was asked in police interviews why he didn't stab Sarah, he tried to claim that he was planning to, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Experts believe, however, that Matthew never planned to stab Sarah at all. Instead, the robbery was a lie to cover up his true motive for committing this mass murder: kidnapping and assaulting a teenage girl. Matthew put a pillowcase over Sarah's head. He loaded her into Stephanie's vehicle, which by then was full of trash bags. Sarah could tell she was lying on top of something, but she didn't know what until much later.
Later, I found out that he had laid me on their dead bodies in the car.
Beneath her were the bodies of her mother's best friend, her dog, and her brother, who Matthew had stabbed in the head while she was attempting to call 911. He brought Sarah to the home that he had shared with a partner and son just weeks prior, a home that was now like something out of a horror movie. There were drawings and writings all over the wall in black ink. In the bathroom where she was stashed and was allowed to remove the pillowcase, there were drawings of strange animals, mutant people, and peace signs. Matthew told her that if she tried to escape, she would be killed by people he had monitoring the house. The 13-year-old laid on the cold bathroom floor in terror. Meanwhile, her kidnapper went to Walmart. Matthew purchased tarps, trash bags, a turkey sandwich, and a $1 Halloween shirt, all while Sarah laid in his bathroom, trapped and unsure if her family was dead or alive. Matthew disposed of the bodies immediately after this footage, which is yet another sign that he had pre-planned the murder of Sarah's family members. Because when you see the twisted place that he had stashed them, it was clear that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. After hiding the bodies, he returned to the home to drop off Stephanie's car and instead take Tina's truck. For what reason? No one's entirely sure. He intended to light the home on fire when he came back, but decided against it and drove away in the truck. Unfortunately for him, the truck kept stalling, so he abandoned it at the Kenyon College parking lot and returned to his own car on foot. In the mess of events, he left behind the Walmart bag full of items he had bought, which would become a key piece in tracking him down. Finally, he returned to his home. Exhausted from the murder he committed, he tied Sarah to his body and took a nap as she laid awake in terror. Meanwhile, Tina and Stephanie's loved ones were beginning to realize something was wrong. On November 11th, Tina's manager called 911 and asked them to perform a welfare check.
Perching 911.
One of my employees did not show up for work this afternoon at 4 o'clock,
Okay.
which is totally uncharacteristic of her. I'm very concerned about her.
What's her name?
Her name is Tina Herman.
Police performed said welfare check, but from the outside of the home, everything seemed fine. When no one answered the door, they were required to move on. Because there were no exigent circumstances, any clear sign that someone was in immediate danger, they had no cause to enter the home. But Tina's manager couldn't take the worry anymore. After police performed 2 welfare checks that came up with no answers and no signs of Tina, her manager let herself into the home. What she found was devastating.
I called in last night about Tina Herman being missing.
Mm-hmm.
I am out at her house now. There is blood everywhere.
When police arrived, they were stunned by the violence of the scene.
With the amount of blood that we saw, it's clear that they could die very shortly if we didn't recover them.
It seemed pretty clear that if the victims weren't dead, they were going to be very soon. That is, until they noticed something peculiar in the bathroom. Footprints in the blood and oil. One set was from the suspect, but there was one print that didn't match. A size 7.5 airwalk. Police confirmed that the shoe size belonged to Sarah, meaning that she had walked through the crime scene after the murders had occurred. She was alive, for now, but the clock was ticking down to her murder. They had to act fast. Back at Matthew's house of hell, Sarah had developed her own strategy for escape. She began to talk to Matthew casually, asking him about his life, his career, his likes and his dislikes. She believed that connecting with him may be the only way to save her life, and it's very probable that she was right. Matthew transported her down to a crawl space in the basement that he had prepared for her. He laid down blankets and pillows over a pile of leaves. The basement was so dirty that his family's pets weren't allowed down there in the past, yet he decided to make it Sarah's home. At times, he would walk downstairs, say nothing, and simply stare at Sarah. Other times he would turn off the lights and leave her in the pitch black, freezing basement for hours on end with her hands and feet tied. Then there were the darkest times of all, times where he assaulted Sarah. He told her repeatedly that her family was alive and well, but even at her young age, Sarah suspected the worst. When Matthew offered her cereal with spoiled milk, she ate it, unsure of when she would ever get a chance to eat again. At one point, he made her read the word ransom out of a dictionary, then promised that he would free her by Christmas. She trusted that he would, but in the meantime, she had no idea if anyone was looking for her. Out in the town, the search was on. Hundreds of crews made their way through the woods, abandoned buildings, and the local community in a mad hunt for the 4 missing people. Fortunately, law enforcement was on the right track. Using the Walmart bag that Matthew left at the scene of the crime, they were able to locate the security footage of him purchasing it and driving off in his Toyota Yaris. A quick search of people who owned Toyota Yaris's in the area returned Matthew Hoffman, who was wearing the exact same shirt in his license photo as he was in the surveillance footage. 4 days after the brutal murder and kidnapping, police surrounded Matthew's home with a specialized SWAT team. When they busted in the door with a battering ram, they discovered Matthew fast asleep on the couch. And they discovered a home straight out of a nightmare. The house was completely covered in leaves. The floor in the living room was nothing but leaves. The walls were lined with bags and bags of leaves. As Matthew was taken into custody, other officers swept the house in a desperate hunt for any of the missing members of their community. In the basement, obscured behind a bookshelf, they discovered the crawl space that Sarah was trapped in. She was bound in duct tape and rope, unable to move. At first, she was terrified that the police were the bad guys that Matthew had warned her about. Soon after, she was flooded with relief when she realized the truth. Police had to take photos of her as she laid on the floor, bound in order to preserve the crime scene. Soon after, she was rushed out of the house to get the help she desperately needed. On the stretcher, she repeatedly told police that she needed to get to school because she had missed so many days. Matthew was immediately taken in for questioning, where his behavior was absolutely maddening. At first, he refused to talk at all, instead miming to detectives.
Heart hurts. I don't understand sign language, man. Is that your heart? You're saying heart? Broken. Your heart's broken? Because of what happened? No. Someone broke your heart? I know you can talk to me, man.
For hours, he refuses to talk or tell detectives if his victims are alive. Slowly, over time, he begins to crack.
I can't tell you anything because I don't know.
You don't know?
I knew I must have done something wrong. And I found her in my house. She tied up. And so I took care of her. I don't really know anything else. So I was trying to figure out what had happened.
It wasn't until detectives brought in a female interrogator that Matthew truly began to give more information.
I think I'm crazy.
Why do you think that?
Because I must have done something bad. I wouldn't be here if I didn't.
Well, that can be worked through.
I'm afraid to even know what it was I did.
Matthew began to claim that he had nightmares where he saw body parts in trash bags, but refused to tell law enforcement what happened. After several days of questioning, he told detectives that he would tell them where the bodies were if they took him out into the woods, let him run away, and then shot him. Naturally, police would not agree to this. On September 17th, 7 days after the initial kidnapping, Matthew finally agreed to show detectives where the bodies were, as long as they took the death penalty off the table for his sentencing. With the family's approval, they made a deal. That deal brought them to this tree in a wildlife area in Fredericton, Ohio. 30 to 40 feet up, there was a large opening inside a hollow tree. After climbing the tree, detectives were able to shine flashlights down to see several trash bags down at the base. A tree trimmer was forced to cut out the base of the tree, allowing detectives to retrieve the bags. If Matthew had not given up the location, there's little chance that the bodies of Stephanie, Tina, and Cody would have ever been found. Matthew was sentenced to life in prison without the chance of parole in exchange for pleaded guilty to his heinous crimes. At trial, a letter written by 13-year-old Sarah was read aloud.
I will never be able to get my mom and brother back until I see them in heaven. Matthew, I want you to know that you will never be forgiven by me. But I'm not scared of you, Matthew. I'm going to stand up for myself and live my life.
Sarah and the victims' family members were beyond devastated, but Sarah has gone on to do exactly as she claimed. She has become an outspoken advocate for victims of kidnapping, working with Elizabeth Smart and others to help support those going through what they were subjected to. She has her own beautiful children and has made a life for herself that her own mother would be proud of.
Of course we feel days, where we feel hopeless and we want to give up. Of course, I'm sure all of us feel that way, but we can't.
At the time of the publishing of this video, Matthew Hoffman sits in prison at Toledo Correctional Institution, where he will remain until the day he dies. If you're looking for another story as unbelievable as this one, imagine this. 19-year-old Andrea Mays was sitting in her car when a stranger pointed a gun at her face and forced her on a multi-state crime spree. Little did she know, he had just killed a woman only hours before. She could be the next person on his list. Click here to watch her shocking fight for survival.